Is Qualcomm stock set to break to the upside, just like Nvidia has and AMD has over the last few weeks? We'll talk about it from a technical perspective on today's show. We'll also look at the Q4 numbers, which sent Qualcomm stock soaring over the last few days. We will compare the valuations to AMD, Intel, and Nvidia, and we'll go through all the information I think you need to know about Qualcomm heading into next week. What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are having a great day out there. It is time to talk about Qualcomm. They reported their Q4 earnings and their Q1 guidance just a couple of days ago. On this stock, we got a $182 billion market cap. We got a $2.72 share dividend, which is at the current time about a 1.67% dividend yield on this one. I tell you what, you got value here in the chip makers at a 15-time forward PE. Over the last year, stock's up only 12%. I say only when you look at Nvidia, that stock's up 12% just in the last few days. Year to date, stock's up just 7%. That's why we're talking about this one could potentially be a breakout candidate. And from a technical perspective, we're actually very close. We'll talk about the levels where we could potentially buy Qualcomm depending on what happens in the coming week. Now, those Q4 numbers came in. And I tell you what, investors really liked it. Revenue came in at $9.34 billion. We'll show that to you here on the financials. We'll walk through the balance sheet, the cash flows, everything that we normally do. Now, those revenues were up 43% year over year, and that was a beat by $500 million. I tell you what, the street loves 43% revenue growth on a stock with a 15 PE and pays a dividend at 1.67%. And not only that, the valuation when we look at it is not even close to where AMD and Nvidia trades at. So Qualcomm shareholders that have been holding on to this were very, very luckily rewarded on this one, because this stock went from in the 130s all the way up to where it's trading at in the 160s in the matter of a day or two. This stock has been rocketing to the upside. We'll see if that's continuing. Now, what looks like is going to continue is actually a revenue in Q1, which is the upcoming quarter for Qualcomm. They're expecting revenue to be between $10 billion and $10.8 billion. The consensus was for $9.73 billion. And I'll remind you, we just did a quarter where we did $9.34 billion. And the non-GAAP earnings per share expected between $2.90 and $3.10. The consensus was only for $2.59. This stock is blowing it out of the park in terms of revenue and profits. The street loves that combination. They're getting strong revenue growth, strong earnings on this one. Not only that, its chips are being used very much in cell phones and automobiles, and those are obviously two trends that nobody sees slowing down anytime soon, especially when it comes to automobiles. Qualcomm, in terms of valuation, I pulled up a price to sales. We probably could do price to earnings on this as well, and if you want to do that, I would guess it paints a similar story. Qualcomm is sitting down here in the orange line. It's trading about 5.5 times sales. AMD is in the blue line. They're trading at 11 times sales. Intel is the lagger in this group, 2.64 times sales. That's why often people flock to Intel and saying, hey, it's value, it's value. But when you look at the market and you look at how chips are being used, Intel just simply is being passed by. Now, can they catch up? Can their chips start being used more often in computers, in cars, in next generation IoT equipment? Certainly, Intel can definitely catch up. And at that time, Intel could become a value stock. But right now, Nvidia, AMD, and Qualcomm are blowing this company away. And look at Nvidia. I mean, the price of sales on that one is 33. So if you have dreams of Qualcomm continuing to go up from a valuation perspective compared to AMD and Nvidia, and maybe even compared to Intel, it should maybe be valued even higher than Intel than it is at the current moment, considering the revenue growth and the profits you're seeing over at Qualcomm. Speaking of this revenue and the profits, here's our last 3 months ended. Here's the most recent quarter where we had that explosive revenue growth. It went from $8.34 billion up to this $9.34 billion. Now, on the cost side, they did a pretty good job, I would guess, in a challenging environment, because we noticed our cost of revenue actually went up quite a bit. Okay, our revenues went up by $1 billion, but our cost of revenues went up by about $1.2 billion. We also had research and development tick up just slightly, and selling general administrative this company's running lean, okay? On $9 billion worth of revenue in a quarter, they spent just $600 million on selling general administrative. Boy, their products sell themselves, and they don't have a lot of back office waste over at Qualcomm. I love that, and that gives us total costs and expenses in the quarter coming in at $6.4 billion. Last quarter, on a quarterly basis, year over year, we were sitting at about $4.9 billion. So our operating income actually down year over year, but I think investors, I'm not thinking this, investors totally gave this company a pass because they love this 40% revenue growth, 40+% revenue growth on that top line side, and they also likely feel in the coming, I would say 6 to 12 months, we'll probably see a softening of the costs that Qualcomm has to outlay for these products. And so as long as you continue to have this revenue growth continue to rise, we should see margin expansion likely in the second half of last year. So that's probably what investors are forecasting for Qualcomm. Our operating income came in at about $3 billion, like I talked about. It's down actually year over year. We were at $3.4 billion. Now, it was just kind of a quarter thing because you notice for the 12 months, we actually went from $6.2 billion up to $9.7 billion, nearly $10 billion worth of operating income. And again, we've got an $180 billion market cap on this one, and the company is printing about $10 billion to the operating side. It's not wildly overvalued, quite frankly. It's actually pretty nice. Not only on top of that, I talked about their dividend where they're paying you $2.72 per share. This is a company that earned nearly $8 per share over the last year. In fact, in the just most recent quarter, on just a diluted basis, they earned $2.45 per share. So they're almost churning out this dividend in a quarter. So you're likely to see this dividend continue to rise, especially when we factor in this company is upsiding their guidance when it comes to earnings. So I love what I'm seeing there. Now, from a balance sheet perspective, it looks really good. Okay, this company has plenty of cash on the balance sheet compared to last year, about the same, quite frankly, ticked up just a little bit. I'll show you here in a second. The debt went from $15.2 billion down to $13.7, but most of it just got walked over here to the short-term side. So they'll likely either have to refinance that or $2 billion will come off that balance sheet or that cash side when they repay that debt. Now, from a cash flow perspective, everything's looking really good. Okay, as you'd expect with this company, pretty well-oiled machine. We've got our 3 months ended here. We pull down these net income numbers, which are relatively the same when you factor in year over year. Our cash flows ticked down actually from $1.7 billion to $1 billion. That's on a quarterly basis. Now, for the 12 months, I think investors are digesting this as well. Last year, we're sitting at $5.8 billion, all the way up to $10 billion worth of cash flows. That's basically what we had on that net income side. I love that, and the valuation definitely looks affordable when we factor in the $180 billion valuation on Qualcomm. In the most recent quarter, they refinanced them debt. They repaid $700 million, but they took out another $700 million. On top of that, they did pay some dividends of about $768 million. But again, this is a company that's printing $1 billion in the quarter. They've got plenty of money to not only cover that dividend, but also increase it likely in the future, especially when we factor in that they are growing their market share over at Qualcomm. Speaking of growing, this stock was down here when it reported earnings at about $138 per share. And then we put a big old gap in this chart and we came all the way up here to the previous highs, which this is the reason why I brought up NVIDIA. So NVIDIA's previous highs were sitting here at 229. And when we broke above, holy crap, we went all the way up to $310 per share. AMD sitting in a similar situation, not quite as glorious, but very close. We're sitting at all-time highs. We're close to 120 on this one. When we solidly broke above it, it went all the way up to $141 per share. Hello, that's why my IRA is looking pretty good right now. I've got a lot of AMD in that one. So Qualcomm's looking like a similar setup. Now, we walked up all the way here to the all-time highs, and we did pull back, okay? The stock is actually trading here at 160. So we need this one to get back up to 168, which is only $4 or $5 higher than where the stock is right now. So not really that big of a deal, but we need a candle or two break above here. And you might be wondering, would I have recommended this 3 or 4 days ago when Qualcomm reporting earnings and this thing gapped up? I would have been recommending the exact same thing from a technical perspective. And if you've been following this channel, this is what we've been recommending in this major bull market we're in, especially when it comes to the chip chip sector as well. But you can look at other FANG stocks as well, similar to maybe like an Apple. We're looking, I mean, I had this all set up last Friday too. We're looking for a break above all-time highs, because when you look at AMD, you break above all-time highs, you bolt on like $20, $30 to the stock price. Same thing with NVIDIA. You break above all-time highs, you bolt on $60 to the share price. So we love that breakout right now. It just seems like the market loves it too. So on Qualcomm, we're looking for a break above really 168.49. It could be even just a little lower than that as well. I think you're looking probably to be safe, $169 per share, another follow on to 170. Even if you're a little late, don't worry, okay? Because look at NVIDIA, okay? This stock gapped and then it ran. Even if you would have bought it on the second or third candle, we're still talking about a massive gain just in the matter of days. Same thing with AMD. It actually gapped above, pulled all the way back to our previous highs, and then bounced again. I could see a similar thing happen with Qualcomm. You could get above this 170 range, pull back to it, and then bounce higher again. And now I am giving you the absolute explosive bull case scenario. And then when we look at AMD and NVIDIA, that is exactly what's materialized. Now, unfortunately, what could happen is that these stocks look, I mean, when you put up a chart like this, it's gotta take a breath at some point. And so if NVIDIA and AMD start pulling back, I would actually expect Qualcomm to pull back as well. And I think there's some obvious areas where we could buy this one. There's an area right here at about $145 per share. We will have not completely filled this gap. That's what has me a little bit worried. If Qualcomm shares do a U-turn next week and we pull back, I would actually expect this gap to be filled. I would expect us to come maybe not all the way back to the gap, but very close to about $140 per share. If you get a pullback to $140 per share on Qualcomm, I think you've got a buying opportunity. Now, notice what happened last time we had a big upside gap on this one. This might have been earnings back in November of last year as well with Qualcomm. Okay, notice the stock was at 130. It gapped up here and then had a big run up to the highs that we talked about at 169, and then it came all the way back and filled this gap perfectly. Okay, notice the price action comes back and fills this gap. You call this gap fill, I think, in terms of technical analysis. Now, we've got a nice base on this stock down here at $125 per share. If for some reason the entire market turns down, well, you've got areas down here really bear. I'm outlining kind of a bear case scenario for you, not necessarily next week, but maybe over the next 3 months or so with Qualcomm. If this thing were to get rejected at these higher prices, you could see a walk back to the $125 level. I think that's an absolute smoking hot buy on this one. But what I would expect with Qualcomm is if it's going to follow through, I think it's likely going to do it next week, and you're going to need NVIDIA and AMD, I think, to continue this strong run on their stock, or at very least hold these levels, if not walk a little higher. I don't think anybody's expecting another 30% growth on these stocks over the next week or two, and if it does, hello, Qualcomm's absolutely smoking hot buy. Probably the entire chip sector is, because we're seeing multiple expansion when something like that happens. Now, with Qualcomm, I think if we break to the upside, it will be next week. So I will be monitoring this very closely, because I personally would like to play the upside on this one, okay? I'd like to get this one, play the upside. You could set a stop loss back here at 168, 165 maybe, just in case you get a pullback and this was just a temporary fake out. Otherwise, you play the run up, you set a trailing stop, and you hope this one gets up to maybe 180, 190 on this one, and you get a nice little trade where you bolt on maybe $20, $30 to your share price just in the matter of weeks. And the bear case, like we talked about, is getting rejected here, which kind of looks like we've already done that to a certain degree. It'd be interesting to see where this one opens Monday. You get a pullback on this one. I would expect this gap to fill or come very close to filling. I think you could start buying this one at $145 down to about this $140 level at Qualcomm. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. We'll be back again soon with more all next week. Good luck with your investments.